The lake house shimmered under the morning sun, the water reflecting a peaceful life I had built brick by brick. But inside, the air was thick with tension. My parents' voices rang through the open living room, sweet smiles masking the storm beneath. "They're moving in next week," my sister announced, voice trembling with excitement. My heart sank as I held the deed in my hands, $515,000 worth of memories, carefully curated, now threatened. Their faces were smug, triumphant, convinced they had won. My parents' eyes darted to me, lips twitching with the assumption I'd cave, that I'd bow to their demands. But they underestimated one thing: the quiet fire I'd carried all my life. I took a deep breath, feeling the smooth oak of the dining table under my palms, the sunlight warming my back. My voice remained calm, steady. I said no. The room froze. Smiles faltered. Whispers rose. And in that instant, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the spark that would ignite everything they never saw coming. I had always preferred quiet mornings over loud family gatherings. My daily life was simple, orderly, predictable, a rhythm I found comfort in. By 6 a.m., I was already walking along the lake's edge, the water glinting like liquid glass, the soft rustle of leaves my only companion. I worked hard, not for recognition, but for peace and stability. My $515,000 lake house wasn't just a property, it was sanctuary, a place where I could breathe without judgment. Growing up, my family was different. My sister, golden-haired and effortlessly charming, had a way of drawing attention, sometimes even at my expense. Parents, relatives, neighbors, they often favored her whims. The imbalance wasn't just financial, it was emotional. She got applause for small efforts, while my contributions went unnoticed, quietly folded into the background. The HOA was another battlefield. Rules were enforced strictly, but not for her. Noise complaints, parking violations, even landscaping. She skirted them effortlessly. Meanwhile, I followed every guideline, every regulation, and yet I often felt under scrutiny. It was exhausting, invisible labor that never earned a nod. Symbolic objects littered my life. My grandmother's piggy bank, now carefully displayed on the mantel, reminded me of resourcefulness and patience. The deed to the lake house sat in a leather folder, my silent shield, proof of everything I'd built. Even the faded photo album on the bookshelf told a story, my efforts documented, my triumphs quietly celebrated, and my sister's favoritism unmistakable in the margins of family snapshots. It wasn't all tension. The lake offered solace, the call of loons at dawn, the splash of a jumping fish, the scent of pine on the breeze. I cherished these moments, grounding me in clarity, reminding me who I was beyond the family drama. But tension always found its way in. One afternoon, my sister invited friends over without notice, trampled through my carefully arranged garden, and left muddy footprints across the freshly swept floors. I confronted her gently, only to have my parents laugh it off, calling me too sensitive and overreacting. The sting of humiliation was sharp, foreshadowing battles I hadn't yet imagined. It was clear. She expected everything handed to her, while I was expected to endure quietly. I could feel the imbalance tightening around my chest, a quiet warning that the confrontation over the lake house wasn't just about money. It was about respect, boundaries, and recognition. And yet, even in the tension, I remained calm. I cataloged everything, conversations, incidents, small injustices, because instinctively, I knew I'd need them one day. Every slight, every petty humiliation, every smug smile was a piece of a puzzle. I didn't yet know when I'd complete it, but I sensed the storm was brewing. The first sting had been small, a garden ruined, a borrowed item lost, a whispered insult, but it was the precursor to something bigger. The lake house was no longer just a home, it was the battleground for years of overlooked effort and silent endurance. And as I watched my sister twirl in sunlight, oblivious to the weight of history pressing down on the room, I felt the first spark of resolve. They thought this was just another petty disagreement. They thought I'd give in quietly, as I had before. But this time, the stakes were higher. I wasn't just protecting a house. I was reclaiming everything I'd silently sacrificed. The days following my no were tense, every interaction with my family charged with unspoken war. My sister's smug grin had turned sharper, almost predatory, like she knew she'd pushed me to a corner. But she didn't realize I wasn't cornered at all. My parents, meanwhile, oscillated between subtle manipulation and outright guilt-tripping. "Think about her feelings," they said, eyes flicking toward the deed like it was a lever they could pull to bend me. Neighbors started whispering. Word spread that I was mean for denying family. Invitations vanished. Invitations that had always been a formality now felt like tests I couldn't pass. Even at the HOA meetings, the room seemed colder, the familiar nods replaced with cautious glances, as if I were suddenly on trial. The emotional toll crept in quietly but mercilessly. Nights stretched long, my thoughts racing in the glow of the lake outside my window. I could hear the distant hum of crickets, the occasional splash of a fish in the water, the wind against the reeds, but they did little to soothe the tightening coil in my chest. My body felt heavy, tense, shoulders stiffened, jaw clenched. It was more than stress. It was the sense of being under siege in my own life. And yet, I resisted. I cataloged everything, every offhand comment, every sly smile, every half-truth whispered to neighbors. My hidden ally, my own patience and meticulous nature, became a quiet weapon. I began documenting conversations with my parents, recording their subtle threats, and photographing every change they made in the house without permission. The deed was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a promise of security and evidence of what was rightfully mine. Then came an unexpected lifeline. My friend Jordan, someone I'd met through a local community group, noticed my exhaustion one evening during a lakefront walk. "You're carrying all of this alone," Jordan said, voice calm but firm, eyes locking with mine. "You don't have to." It was the first reminder I wasn't isolated, the first moment someone acknowledged that my struggle was real and valid. Meanwhile, my sister escalated. She invited contractors to improve the lake house, claiming my absence at work meant consent. She spread subtle rumors, portraying me as controlling and unkind. Even casual acquaintances now hesitated around me, unsure whose side to take. The isolation was deliberate, designed to erode my confidence. But every step she took, every whisper she spread, only strengthened my resolve. I started noticing patterns, the way she leaned into my parents' favoritism, how she leveraged minor slips against me, the small victories she took for granted. And I knew I had to act strategically. Emotional impulse would not serve me here. Evidence and patience would. The first sparks of resistance grew into a quiet storm. My journals became maps of their intentions. My photos became proof. My calm voice became armor. And in that armor, I began to sense momentum. I wasn't fighting blindly. I was preparing to reclaim not just my house, but the respect and recognition they had denied me for decades. One evening, as I sat by the lake, writing down every detail of that day's confrontation, a ripple passed through the water, like the universe acknowledging that change was coming. And then it struck me. The moment I had dreaded for years, when they would finally think they'd won, was the very moment that would set the stage for their downfall. That was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone, I whispered to the lake, feeling a chill of anticipation in the night air. And I knew, beyond any doubt, the next moves would be decisive. Just when I thought the tension couldn't escalate further, they brought in the big guns. My parents, emboldened by my sister's brazen confidence, invoked authority in ways I hadn't anticipated. They mentioned HOA fines, hinted at legal action, and even hinted that a call to the police might sort things out if I didn't comply. The calm facade I had maintained wavered for a moment, the room thick with the weight of looming confrontation. Family meetings became arenas. The air smelled of coffee and old books, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, spotlighting every grimace and forced smile. My parents' voices grew sharper, rehearsed, each word calculated to erode my resolve. My sister's eyes sparkled with triumph, as if she could already taste victory. It was a performance, designed to corner me, to make the $515,000 Lakehouse feel unattainable. For a moment, despair pressed in. I could almost hear the courtroom gavel striking, felt the icy glare of judgment from neighbors and relatives alike. Yet beneath the pressure, a quiet awareness stirred. I wasn't powerless. The deed, tucked safely in my leather folder, was more than a piece of paper. It was my shield. The photo album, filled with decades of evidence and memories, was my silent witness. Every slip my sister had made, every instance of favoritism, every petty humiliation, they were all pieces of a puzzle, waiting for the right moment. And then, the spark ignited. I remembered the letters, the receipts, the recordings of conversations, and the subtle manipulations my sister had executed. I had overlooked nothing. With a steady hand, I began compiling them into a single, irrefutable case. Allies quietly aligned themselves behind the scenes. Jordan, legal counsel I'd consulted discreetly, even a neighbor who had long admired my diligence. The tide was turning, though my parents and sister had yet to sense it. The most startling moment came when my sister, overconfident, tried to confront me directly, thinking she could intimidate me into surrender. I simply smiled, calm, unshaken. "You thought you had control," I said, voice quiet but firm. "But control isn't given, it's earned, and it's protected." Her eyes flickered, a brief crack in the armor of her smug confidence. My parents shifted uncomfortably, the first signs that their assumed dominance was slipping. But rather than retreating, they doubled down, escalating the pressure, their tactics growing sharper and more desperate. The realization hit me. They believed they still held the upper hand. They didn't see the web I had been weaving, the alliances forming quietly behind their back. They didn't know the moment of reckoning was approaching, when every small piece of evidence would align perfectly against their assumptions. And in that tension, the calm of the Lakehouse became my ally again. The gentle lapping of water against the dock, the distant call of a loon, the rustle of autumn leaves. They reminded me who I was, what I had built, and what I was defending. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a flicker of anticipation, a quiet thrill. They thought they still had control. They didn't, I whispered into the night, feeling the air hum with the promise of confrontation yet to come. And deep down, I knew the next act would change everything. When cornered, some people retreat. My sister didn't. She advanced. Rumors began to bloom like weeds across the neighborhood. Whispers at the grocery store, knowing glances at the HOA meetings, even hushed conversations at church. I could feel them closing ranks. According to her version of the story, I was cruel, selfish, and unwilling to help family in need. She painted herself as the victim, the golden daughter wronged by a cold and unfeeling sibling. And my parents, willingly or blindly, fanned the flames. It wasn't just gossip. Anonymous letters appeared in my mailbox, laced with judgment. "Family comes first," one note read, the ink scrawled angrily across cheap stationery. Another said, "You'll regret your selfishness." My once peaceful sanctuary felt invaded. Even walking to my mailbox carried tension, the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes echoing in the silence of suspicious eyes watching from porches. But where they thought I'd crumble, I adapted. I became strategic. Every insult, every note, every whispered accusation, I collected it. My journals thickened with evidence, my folders filled with screenshots and statements. Jordan helped me organize it all, their steady voice reminding me that facts were stronger than lies. The deed, my anchor, became more symbolic with every passing day. I kept it visible on my desk, framed by my grandmother's piggy bank and the old photo album. It wasn't just about ownership, it was a statement. This is mine. I built it, I earned it, and I will not let it be taken. Still, the weight was heavy. Sleepless nights persisted, the ceiling fan whirring above me as my mind replayed conversations like a broken record. My body carried the strain. Headaches, clenched teeth, restless pacing along the dock. Sometimes I'd stand at the water's edge, the cool air brushing against my face, imagining the day when this battle would end. My sister, however, was unraveling. I could see it in her eyes, the cracks spreading across her mask of confidence. She pushed harder, demanding more, recruiting distant relatives as her flying monkeys. They called me, urging me to be reasonable, parroting her words like they were gospel. I listened, polite but firm, their words dissolving into the growing archive of manipulation. At one HOA meeting, she staged her boldest attack yet. She stood before the room, her voice trembling with false vulnerability, accusing me of hoarding the Lakehouse, of being heartless. Gasps echoed in the room, eyes flickering toward me. I could feel their judgment, heavy and suffocating. But instead of defending myself with anger, I smiled. I stayed calm. I respect your feelings, I said evenly, my voice cutting through the room like steady steel. But the truth isn't always what it seems. And I left it at that. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it was mine. I could see the shift starting. Neighbors who had once believed her lies now looked uncertain. My calmness unsettled her more than any outburst could. She thrived on chaos, but I thrived on preparation. Every day the symbolic objects grew heavier with meaning. The piggy bank wasn't just childhood nostalgia, it was proof of years of saving, discipline, and foresight. The deed wasn't just paper, it was the weapon she could never forge. The photo album wasn't just memories, it was history, undeniable and unspinnable. I knew the day was approaching. The day when whispers would no longer matter, when rumors would dissolve against cold, hard truth. The day of reckoning was coming, I told myself, watching the lake shimmer under the moonlight. And no one could stop it. The showdown came on a gray morning that seemed to carry the weight of inevitability. The HOA had called a special meeting after my sister pushed for community intervention. Neighbors shuffled into the clubhouse, their faces curious, wary, some already carrying judgment in their eyes. My parents sat together, stone-faced, while my sister wore a smile so smug it made the air feel heavy. She thought this was the moment she would finally break me. The room buzzed with whispers, the scent of coffee and damp coats clinging to the air. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped against the floor, and then silence. My sister stood, her voice syrupy but sharp. "My sister refuses to honor family," she began, gesturing toward me like I was a defendant on trial. "We've always supported her, but now she's cruel, heartless, denying us even a roof over our heads. It isn't right." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward me, expectant. She was so sure I'd falter under the pressure, so sure the humiliation would silence me. Instead, I rose slowly, calmly, the leather folder in my hands. The click of the clasp echoed louder than her words ever could. I laid the deed on the table, its edges crisp, official, undeniable. "This," I said evenly, my voice carrying through the hushed room, "is the proof of ownership. My purchase, my payments, my sacrifice." My sister shifted in her seat, her confidence cracking. But I wasn't done. I slid out the photo album, flipping it open with deliberate care. Page after page showed the years of effort, the overlooked moments, the favoritism etched into family history. Smiles too wide, gifts unbalanced, achievements ignored. Evidence no one could dispute. And then came the recordings. Jordan pressed play on a small speaker, and the room filled with my parents' voices. Subtle threats, manipulative guilt, their attempts to corner me. The room went deathly still. My sister's hands trembled in her lap, my parents' faces drained of color. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the rustle of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Neighbors who had once whispered accusations now looked shocked, even ashamed. I straightened, every ounce of fear stripped away. My voice was calm, steady, sharper than it had ever been. I've stayed quiet my entire life. I gave more, while she took more. I endured the humiliation, the rumors, the lies, but not anymore. I let the words hang in the air, deliberate and final. My sister tried to speak, but her voice caught. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for support that was no longer there. My parents sat frozen, their power slipping through their fingers. "I don't want apologies," I said, looking directly at them. "I want change." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a collective exhale. Neighbors nodded, murmurs of agreement swirled, and for the first time in years I felt the shift. The balance of power had moved. The smug smiles were gone. In their place was silence, defeat, and the undeniable weight of truth. And in that silence, I knew. The empire they'd built on favoritism, manipulation, and lies had crumbled. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No shouting matches, no dramatic apologies. Just silence, like a storm that had finally spent itself. My sister avoided me for weeks. The smugness that had once defined her presence had evaporated, leaving only a hollow, restless energy. When she passed me at community gatherings, she couldn't hold my gaze. My parents, once so quick to lecture and guilt, now spoke cautiously, their words measured, their power diffused. The neighborhood shifted too. Those who had once believed the rumors now offered small nods, polite greetings, even quiet apologies disguised in casual conversation. "Beautiful day by the lake," one neighbor said, his tone sheepish, as though he were acknowledging more than the weather. The weight of suspicion had lifted. The truth had spoken louder than whispers ever could. In the weeks that followed, I reclaimed my peace. The Lakehouse, once a battleground, became a sanctuary again. I replaced the broken lock on the front gate, the metallic click ringing like a declaration. This place is mine, and it is safe again. Symbolic objects found new life. The piggy bank, once empty, I filled with crisp $2 bills, a playful reminder of resilience and prosperity. The deed, no longer tucked away in a folder, I framed and hung on the wall above my desk, not as a boast, but as a symbol of hard-earned independence. And the photo album. I didn't hide it anymore. I placed it on the coffee table, where guests could leaf through and see not just a family's history, but the proof of a story I refused to let be erased. Jordan became a constant presence, a reminder that I was never truly alone, even in the darkest moments. Together, we walked along the lake most evenings, the sunset painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson. The water lapped softly against the dock, no longer sounding like a countdown to confrontation, but a rhythm of peace. But most importantly, I had changed. I no longer measured my worth by my family's approval, their favoritism, their attempts at control, their manipulations. They were reflections of their own flaws, not my inadequacy. For the first time, I set boundaries without guilt, and I held them firmly. The contrast between the opening humiliation and the final empowerment was striking. I remembered that first moment, my parents' smug faces, my sister's triumphant smile, the assumption that I would fold. And now? Their empire had collapsed, their control shattered, their certainty dissolved. I wasn't broken. I was rebuilt. And as I stood on the dock one quiet evening, the framed deed glowing in the warm light of the house behind me, I felt a strange but steady calm. This wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of a new chapter. "This wasn't the end," I whispered. the lake reflecting a sky full of stars. It was the beginning. Have you ever been caught in the grip of favoritism, betrayal, or someone else's abuse of power? Have you ever been told to stay quiet, to give in, to sacrifice your peace for someone else's comfort? I know how heavy that silence can feel. But I also know this. The moment you draw a line, the moment you protect what's yours with calm conviction, everything changes. Your worth isn't measured by how much you endure for others. It's measured by the boundaries you protect and the life you claim for yourself. So I'll ask you, how did you rise above it? Share your story below. Let's turn silence into strength and isolation into community. Because in the end, worth isn't something they give you. It's something you claim for yourself.